system to protect consumer data. For this session, please welcome Alfred Bonilla, SAP Customer Experience, Customer Data, GTM Head, SAP Japan, Prasun Kumar, CMO Just Dial, Parth Joshi, CMO Bharat Pay, Rohit Dhar, Global President Products Upgrade. The session will be moderated by Vivek Bhargav, co-founder, ProfitWeave. Over to you, Vivek.
Hi everyone, this is Vivek here. I'm talking about consumer and her data privacy. So I generally believe that privacy is a very, very critical factor in today's digital age, but it's becoming almost impossible to implement it because it was started off that if you take consent of the user, then you can actually use that user's data. But it's very difficult today for consumers to not give that consent, right? Because half the places consumers are giving and signing data privacy agreements which are 20,000 to 36,000 words in size. It'll take us days and years before we read all those agreements. It's also to do with that the internet and digital age is about having a lot of things given to us for free. And when things we get for free, that means we are the product. So the fact of the matter is our data becomes a product. So again, if you want to continue with getting information and getting a lot of things that we're used to for free, then probably how limited data privacy is going to be. Thirdly, I think what is happening is that it was always about PII data, personally identifiable information. But now what has happened is that because of AI and because of computing power becoming so good, what happens is that people connect the dots. So even though I may not get PII information from the person, but because I know the PIN code the person has, the gender, the age, I can actually sort of dovetail and find out who the person is. So that becomes extremely dangerous because then you have personally identifiable information, even though you are supposed to not collect PII data as per GDPR and a lot of other privacy guidelines, right? So I think the biggest challenge is that today brands have to use first-party data. We're living in a cookieless world. So the first-party data is going to become very, very critical. But then how do we use that first-party data safely to make advertising more effective, but ensure that the consumer's rights are protected is becoming a challenge. So on this topic, we're going to have discussions from my panelists from SAP, Alfred, Prasun, Parth, Rohit, and we're going to discuss what are the challenges and how we're going to solve these challenges. So starting with you, Alfred, would love you to give a 2-3 minutes sort of your view on the topic of data privacy and how do we protect the consumer rights.
First and foremost, thank you, Vivek, for having me. So I couldn't agree more with the complexities that are lying in front of companies today, particularly as it pertains with respect to privacy. Now, the fundamental thought that we have at SAP is the fact that it all lies on making it human, number one. Number two, it's about trust. And number three, it's about value exchange. So when you actually highlighted the fact that, these contracts are getting to a point where they're unsustainably, or somebody wouldn't be feasibly able to read it in order to understand what's written on them, it couldn't be more true. And that's really, at the same time, ironically, it couldn't be further away from what the regulators really want. What they really want is completely the opposite. Make it human readable, make it explicit, make it very specific. What are you going to be using that data for? So at SAP, we do uphold these 3 principles that we spoke about earlier. It's about trust, it's about getting the human component back to it, and it's about that value exchange in the solutions that we actually offer. And it kind of sounds a lot more complex than it really is. So we have a solution that we call it customer data management. And as part of it, we have what we call the enterprise consent and preference management modules. And there you'll have things like, not that little box that everybody's used to where you just check the box and say, I give you all my data and you can do whatever you want. Because again, that couldn't be further away from what regulators really want and what people, us as consumers and individuals really want. It's more about, why do you want my data? What do I get in exchange? And because I feel that there's value in that exchange, I'll go ahead and pass it on to you so that you can handle it, manage it, but not necessarily or definitely not misuse it. And I think that that's what I'm looking forward to discussing with today's panel. Here to help, particularly from a perspective of having been in the industry, particularly from a customer identity and access management, customer preference and consent management, as well as data management overall for the past 15 years, advising CMOs, CPOs, CDOs, digital officers, marketing officers, how to put the consumer at that center of that journey.
Yeah. Actually, that reminds me, Alfred, like I read somewhere that compliance is not trust. And a lot of times companies today are trying to meet the compliance requirement, but that's not trust. So the best example I can think of is when the Titanic was making its maiden voyage, the compliance said that they needed to have lifeboats that will cover half the passengers. The previous, ships used to cross rivers and they were not transatlantic or trans-Pacific. So the thing is that compliance was good enough, but we all know what happened thereafter, because if they were going to go, on that journey, they should have had lifeboats for all the people and more, right? So I think that's what the key is, that what is the best thing to do, and how do we ensure that people are sharing data with us, we take care of the trust, not take care of compliance. So on that note, Prasun, would love to have your views on the topic.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Vivek. And I couldn't agree more with Alfred. Two things that you guys said, keeping consumers at the center and, just not meeting the compliance thing. And therefore, I think data protection has to move from compliance burden to becoming fundamental to consumer relationship approach. And that's really the change that has to happen, right? So when you talk of, protecting consumer and her data, there are two things that come to my mind. One is privacy related issues, and second is piracy related issues. And both these things kind of go hand in hand, right? And when you're trying to protect data, you're trying to respect the privacy of the consumer. Therefore, and that's more inward oriented, that's more internal. How are you using the data to reach out to the consumer and so on and so forth, where advertising comes into play. And second is about protecting that data from outside threat, external threat, hackers and a lot of other issues, which is where data security related issues come in. So these two things obviously have to be looked together when we are looking at protecting the consumer, and her data. And also, as Alfred rightly said, I think three things are very critical in this entire process. And I call those the three T's in a way. Two of them were already spoken by Alfred, which is transparency and trust. I'll just add one more T to that, which is technology. And I think, these three things are super critical for any company to look at. Transparency, of course, keeping consumer at the center, developing user-centric privacy controls. We all are aware about today opt-in, opt-out policies and consent-based policies and so on and so forth. But really, how do you implement those, and how do you genuinely drive that at the core of your operations and processes is where the real challenge is. And also, I think a lot of these things can be tackled using by minimizing human intervention in a way. And again, Alfred was touching on that point, that regulations are forcing us to get into more and more human interventions, reading data and trying to figure out. I think the answer lies on the other side of the river. Actually, it's about lesser human intervention, more automation, and therefore giving consumers the trust that the data is secure. It's not kind of being individually manipulated or looked at in a certain manner, which you may or may not want, and so on and so forth. I think consumers by and large are far more acceptable to a fact that when their data is managed by a machine, and then the reciprocity that they show in terms of even receiving messages and so on and so forth. I think if that's clear to consumers, they are far more forgiving. Vis-a-vis in a scenario where they know there's human intervention, there's no guarantee that the data may or may not be misused in a certain manner. So I think a lot of these things are very, very critical when we are looking at data protection. And all these challenges are in front of CMOs and CTOs and everyone else across organizations, and very, very pertinent topic. So would love to discuss more on this as we go forward.
Sure, Prasun. I think the thing that you mentioned about technology, I can't agree with it more. And the biggest challenge is going to be that with quantum computing coming in, with AI becoming more and more cognitive, what's going to happen is a lot of ways in which we encrypt and store information, suddenly technology will be able to decrypt. And it's going to create a new challenge for companies, because the more advanced and larger enterprises, a large enterprise it is, the more and more dots it can connect and basically then utilize that data more effectively. So it's going to be a big challenge as technology improves, that how do we actually now save and keep the data safe, because technology is actually going to sort of create transparency even in areas where we don't want it to be transparent. Yeah, Parth, would love to have your views on the topic.
No, since the advent of the digital economy, right, I think data has become a center point. And for a large part of since the starting of the digital economy, it was quite the wild west, right? You squat where you are, you take what you can, and you squat on it, and you fight the raiders, and so on and so forth. Now, some people did it well, some people were not so responsible about it. The one inflection point I think that has come in the past few years is the consumers waking up to it and realizing that the data is their product. Data is a product, and there are companies and billion-dollar enterprises, multi-billion-dollar enterprises that are built around consumer data. So as we step into the new age, regulators catching up, and right from GDPR in Europe to PDP in Southeast Asia to DPP in India or CCP in US, you have all these nice data protection bills kind of coming in, but regulators are still catching up, right? And like you mentioned, Prasun, compliance isn't really the right thing. It doesn't mean that if you're just following the letter of the law, you're doing the right thing. So while the regulators will take time to catch up, I think data protection, privacy, knowing well that the consumer have woken up to him, will become a key point for any brand, any business, and in fact, if I might say, a competitive advantage. At the end of the day, the consumers are not saying that I don't want you to give me my data, but they're saying that, hey, if I'm giving you my data, I'm trusting you with this, right? So the value exchange that Alfred talked about, the trust becomes a very key part of that value exchange. And with great power comes great responsibility. And so how do we manage this data, as brands, to make sure we are interacting with consumers the way that they want to? Because it's a pull-based economy now. It's no longer push-based, right? They want to consume, consumers want to consume what they want to, right? And that includes media. So that will become very, very important, and consumers will pick and choose, and how brands interact with them, data being at the core of it, will form a significant advantage. Like Prasun again spoke, I'm repeating some of the things, is that apart from brands using the data judiciously, the second part will be about the security of the data, right? So we have to become much more serious about it. The kind of data breaches that are there in the news every other day are critical to manage, and there needs to be a proper concerted effort by organizations, by businesses, saying that, okay, we have this data from our consumers. This can be how we manage this, how we handle this, how we secure this is not only about compliance, but potentially a strategic differentiation that we can create, and which can put us at the pole position across this. And there are various facets to it, whether you talk about the kind of what are the different, how do you classify data, how do you store data, how do you secure that data, how do you design policies around managing and communicating with the consumer and handling that data, the responsibility and the trust that somebody has on laid upon you. Because once you lose it, it's quite difficult to get it back, right? So it will be interesting to see how both companies take responsibility for it, right? A lot of both managing the data as well as securing the data, and how the regulatory framework kind of develops further, right? And stops playing catch up and rather works with the industry to figure out what is the right way to do this, benefiting the consumers, ensuring that the consumer experience is at the center of it.
So I think just one thing to add, Bharat, I think you said data is the product, but now I think consumers are the product and people have realized that they are the product. But I think I just had one thought that consumers who are in developed countries, are they more aware about their rights and their the power of the data and their value of the data as compared to some of the emerging markets? So maybe it's a discussion that we can do. Is it a very affluent developed country thinking and the top 10 million users in markets like India, or is it something which a person who's just joined the internet 3 months ago, he also thinks that, you know, sharing data is a challenge for him?
I think with the connected economy and the proliferation of information, what's happened is, I don't think we can classify it in developed versus developing countries, right? I think there are segments of customers across countries. So if you look at the affluent population of India versus the affluent population of US, just in sheer numbers, we'll beat them in the number of people who are concerned about their data, right? So whether it be Indonesia or whatever, right? So
that's the reason I said 10 million in India. 10 million people in India are concerned about data.
Probably much more, right? So yeah, so I don't think it's there, but I think the criticality of this becomes more, responsibility becomes more accentuated in the developed countries, because they have a far more redressal systems, right? So for example, US is a highly litigious sort of a system, right? So the downside, right, the deterrent for a big organization to be responsible is much higher, right? And also with the frameworks of law increasing and the litigiousness of the system. So there are multiple facets to it, but which cause some of the developing countries to seem like, okay, there perhaps the consumers. No, I don't think it's more about the consumers as much. Maybe there would be, right? In sheer percentages, there would be, because there would be a overall bell curve to this. But I think it's more about what are the deterrents, what are the kind of frameworks that are in place, and how empowered do consumers feel to fight the big corporations, for example.
Good. Perfect. Rohit, your views?
Hi. So very quickly, I think I really liked what Alfred said. Alfred had a element of human component, valuing exchange and trust. I think that's a very good way, a segue of structuring the conversation. And then Prasun said transparency, trust, and technology. So it is a very interesting element that both of you came back with 3 points, and completely makes sense. For me, privacy and protection is it's a responsibility. Right? End of the day, it's a right for the consumer, who is a consumer who's consuming the content and sharing the data, and it is the guy who's creating, like people like us who are creating the systems. It's our responsibility that we need to be ethical towards it. It's like if someone is not watching, we go and we cross the red light or a signal. Like that cannot happen, right? If people are not aware, that doesn't mean we are unethical and we start shying away from our responsibility of not being, transparent, not being trustworthy, not ensuring that our technology works in a way where we just don't hog on data and just use it in a wrong way. That's unethical, fundamentally unethical. And again, I think Parth has already called out, there are businesses which have been built on this data. So there is nothing more that we can talk about on this front. But here's my request, and I think for every individual or a senior leader out there, that it's a responsibility for a leader to ensure that we are capturing PII information, personally identifiable information of users. And that is both user profile data and user behavior data. Both of this information is it absolutely maps back to that user. And that's what we leverage to do a lot of things in the name of giving customer a customized, personalized experience. And that's the little, wall / marketing package that we have in front of us. So while we do that, we need to be very, very conscious that how are we ensuring that data is securely kept with us and is not being shareable and it's not being penetratable. At Upgrad, we try and create a vault. We just put all the data inside that vault, and we ensure that there is no way people have access to it. That's what we have, and because you've seen how multiple times large organizations there's been data leak as a challenge, and this data is not shared with anyone out there. That's the goal that we're heading towards. Are we 100% there? No, not at all. Do we want to be there? 100% we want to be there. Does it matter that we are compliant, not compliant? Of course, from an accounting, from a regulatory, from an audit standpoint, we have to be compliant. But for me, mentally, I can't be unethical. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to just do all random. So that's where, for me personally, this is my responsibility to ensure that my users' data are being kept in an organized fashion and securely under a vault, and the key is literally given to only the folks that are absolutely needed, and we don't manipulate that data for our own interest. That's what I am looking at, and that's what I would highly recommend to all the leaders out there in their organization.
Yeah, just to add, similarly, when I started Profit Wheel a year ago, we said we will not take first-party data from anyone, first thing. And we will basically help companies use their first-party data in making the advertising more effective or do the content more effectively. But at no point in time, we will take any first-party data from them. You create a custom audience on Facebook or give us Sharp 256 data, and from there only we'll make that data and that consumer transparent to you. Because I think GDPR and some of these companies, for small startups like us, one single breach, even is done in any way whatsoever, can wipe out the entire organization.
Wiped out.
Yeah.
A lot of those things don't matter really. I'm sure all of us are aware of the Jamtara syndrome, right? And so, a bunch of probably 10th fail grads can steal data from anywhere in the world. So, data protection has multiple layers surrounding it.
Absolutely. And this is where your third leg of technology comes in, Prasun. So a bunch of grads can come in and definitely, and I see these guys sending emails, hey, I have this data from you. Absolutely. I have that data from you. And you're like, okay. And you're literally trembling. You really, that much of data you have? And then you're saying, send a sample data. And all of this happens. Always it happens across the board. But I think end of the day, as long as we are responsible and consciously taking calls versus just worried about compliance, I think we are heading towards the right. Are we all 100% secure? No, even Bank of America is not 100% secure. But as long as we are ensuring that we are heading towards that, I think we are sorted.
Okay, so Rohit, on that note, I would love to have your views. Upgrad does collect a lot of data to improve the learning experiences of learners, right? And also you do it while onboarding, but you also do it while the person is actually completing the course, right? So would love to have some thoughts on how you're using the data to really enhance the consumer experience.
So Vivek, I'll give you a context here, and I don't know how much time I have, but I'll take not more than 2 minutes just to give you context. If you think and if you look around, a lot of our friends or known people out there probably are in their jobs and not very happy with what they're doing. But they're doing it because effectively we all, or most of us, work for the credit card bills and the mortgage that you have to pay. And that's why we are just stuck with our job, right? And that's a feeling that the person comes at home and goes back home, comes to office and goes back home and continues to have that. The family is not happy, he or she is not happy, and then they go back home, they take that unhappiness there. In my head personally, I'm wanting to make sure that can I give that person a kind of a career path predictor, which means if Alfred is today a software engineer and he wants to be a data scientist, but he doesn't know how can he can be a data scientist. What are the things that he or she should be doing to get there? I'm ensuring that I get enough information from Alfred to understand what Alfred has done so far, what is his interest, and how can I ensure that he gets there as a data scientist. For that information is needed for us to be able to predict and help the person to get there. Now, two pieces. One, if Alfred wants to do a data science course, does he even have taken maths if he's an art student and wants to do data science, I have to literally bang my head on the wall and say, Alfred, it'll be very hard, buddy, because how do I make you learn modeling? that is something that I have to work hard with Alfred to get there. Hence, those are criteria that we would want to ensure that we have the right guys coming in and being set up right. The second piece of it is after they've been, even if he does a data science course, Alfred, just an example, yeah, don't take it personally. So the second piece of it is he has finished, but he's still a fresher. A fresher who's a data scientist and has just learned, it's very hard for him to get a job. At that point in time, what we want is when he's finished, we want to get a little more information. Hey, what have you learned? Where have you learned? What is your skill now? Where do you stand? And what can we help you in terms of preparing you for the next transition of your life? At that point in time, we will prep him up for soft skills. We'll prep him up for hard skills. We'll prep him up for certain interview questions. We'll prep him up for his LinkedIn profile. We'll prep him up for his resume to ensure that. And so during that process, we'll also ask you what is the expectation of his cash component, salary component, all of those, just for us to understand and take him to the next level. Else, what happens is we can't be like, we can't work in an island. We can't work in a silo and say, hey, we have done our job. You just figure it out. Again, that's when the ethics and responsibility comes in. I can't take a bunch of money out of you and then say, you know what, you did your course, we give you the certificate, we are done. Thank you very much, Alfred. Enjoy yourself. That's something that we don't want to do, and hence these information is needed to get the guy there. And we have, I'm very proud to say that we have done around 50,000 odd right now enrolled users who are doing more than 6 months to 2 years of courses with us, with universities. And out of them, we have thousands of students who have actually found a job through our career platform. We have over 45,000 jobs at this point in time listed on our platform. So this is what is happening, and we have an internal recruitment team which only connects directly with the organizations to do this. So all of this needs we need to ensure that the learner is plugged in, and for that we need this information, and that's how we use this information.
Cool. So over to you, Parth. I think basically what according to you is what do customers want from their brand relationships, and how can brands build these sort of sets of cohorts for deeper engagement, especially when we are progressing towards a completely cookieless world? Yeah.
See, I think what I said earlier kind of I'll pick up from that consumers want to be communicated with and want to consume the material that they want to, right? And to be honest, consumers are willing to give up their data if they see a real value kind of coming from the publishers that they are doing, that they're interacting with, or any brand that they're interacting, any business that they're interacting with. If by giving my data to you, you ease up my life. Like example, Rohit was talking about how Hubgrad does it, right? Similarly, BharatPe would do it by saying that if I have your data, I can give more personalized recommendations to you. I can help you grow your business and provide the right tools for you, right? I don't want to give you a product which is worthless to you. But if I am able to take your data and able to provide you tools, the methods, the right solutions for your business to grow, now that's where consumers become very okay with sharing this data. And this first party data is going to become critical as we move into a cookieless world, right? And therefore, once you don't have the trackability, you'll, iOS is already cracked down, Android is talking about it, Google is talking about it already. So when this kind of goes away and the third party targetability goes down, then your first party data will become very, very important. With growing consumer concerns, therefore, you will have to provide the value to the consumers and give them a reason why should they be sharing whatever data it is. So companies will need to be very, very transparent, on why they're collecting what they're collecting. Be very responsible to say that, okay, how we take care of this data, and that includes how you classify the data, right? And within PII also, there are various levels. So you take generic data, you take PII data, there might be even more sensitive data, financial information, health information, which is super, super sensitive. And how do you secure it, do it? And once you have that, that's when the consumer and you have to deliver an experience that elevates the overall customer focus, and that kind of makes the consumer feel special and say that, hey, I can see how they're using this data. Or by providing my data, my experience, my interaction with this business, this brand has grown manyfold. If I provide my phone number or X or Y or Z, I get more personalized recommendations. I get an experience which is more tailored to me, which is more relevant to me, rather than going to a plain vanilla when I don't do anything. Right? And you will have to give options to those consumers, saying that what level of tailoring do they want, and consequently what kind of data they have to share. Right? So that will have to be very, very critical to build this two-way, transparent, honest relationship, to be able to have first-party data, which will still allow you to give good experiences and give yourself an advantage in the world. If you just take data and do nothing about it, you are not able to convert this data into a positive outcome for the customer. Then the consumer will say, okay, why am I even giving you this data, right? And of course, there are multiple technical solutions to manage in a cookieless world, right? So that includes, how do you get the right ecosystem of partnerships? For example, like-minded companies and organizations who come together to, again, deliver more value to their customers. How do you take that overlap? How do you use some of the more technical solutions, right? People-based durable IDs, for example. How do you make your own data machinery? We talked about AI and ML, right? So let's say, you start today saying that my customer wants to be talked to in a certain language, right? But not everybody will tell you what language preference that they have, right? So how do you set up a data machinery which will allow you to identify that Hindi-speaking merchant in Chennai, right, who doesn't want to be spoken in Tamil or English, but actually in Hindi? Right? How do you do a testing, learning? How do you create that data infrastructure, that data refinement infrastructure that allows you to really take your first-party data and your behavioral data to generate more out of it? We often say that it's the often quoted thing saying that data is the new oil, right? Because it needs to be mined. But data is the new oil goes deeper than that. Data is the new oil means you need to really refine that data. Right? There will be different grades of fuel that will come out of it, right? You'll also get the coal tar, right? And you'll also get rocket fuel, but you have to have the machinery to be able to refine that data and to be able to use that data. And as we move into a cookieless world where consumers are more empowered, are more aware, their expectations are higher, it is really up to the organizations, the businesses, to manage this data responsibly, be transparent about it, and deliver real value to the consumers through the usage of this data.
I was working on a course for one of the investments I've done. They basically make courses on different things, and one of the things was data-driven decisions as a topic in the course, right? And what you said is so right, that it's like oil, but then it has to be refined. And how do you take the right data to take the right decision at the right time? And whether it's advertising, whether it's content, it's creative, but I think it's very, very critical. The companies who actually get that process right are the ones who will succeed in this digital age, and the companies who don't will fail. So
I don't know of any decision today which is not data driven, for that matter. It's hygiene, right?
Yeah.
But just to add to what Parth and Rohit was saying, I would just add a few more dimensions to this. It's not only at the point of data collection or generation that there is a challenge related to data protection. The data protection challenge is across the data funnel, right? So it's at the data generation points where you need to be very, very clear about, and I think both Parth and Rohit spoke about that in detail. I think at a data transmit state within the organization itself, right? How is data getting secured when it's getting transmitted? At a data store level, how are you storing data, and what kind of protections you are applying across over there? When you're consuming the same data for advertising, messaging, and so on and so forth, there is a chance of leakage out there. And finally, if you have to dispose of a data, right, how effectively you're doing that, what kind of protection tiers you are building around that, so that data does not kind of gets leaked from there. So it has multiple dimensions. It goes very deep, and it goes across. Really, it's not really about, it's not a marketing problem. It's an organization problem. It's a business problem, right? And every business is data business today. Every business. There's no business which is not a data business, and therefore it needs to be on the agenda right from at a board level. If you really ask me, it should not be left only for CMOs and CTOs to decide what to do with this and what not to do with this. This is far too important an issue for even a CEO or for that matter board of directors to ignore, to say that how do you protect the data and what do you do with the data and how do you do the things that you do with the data. So this goes across the organization. And I think sensitization of not only guys who are custodian of that data and who are using that data, but across every single stream within the organization, there needs to be a sensitization related to data. And it's really about how I should say how much care you are taking when you are really dealing with consumer data inside. And Path and others spoke about the intent part there, right? What's your intent as business? And therefore it all starts from there. You need to have respect for that privacy to begin with, and then every other thing, the processes and the policies and the investments will follow from there. And therefore it's an agenda at the very, very top of the organization, to my mind. And and across every kind of organization, it needs to flow from there. And not only, it's not a departmental silo issue at all.
I love what Prasun said, because I think, just the way we spend cash as different parts of the organization, right? Different departments, we always rationalize it. Are we getting the max bang for the buck? Are we judicious about how we are spending the money? I think the same applies for data. It's an organizational resource and does not belong to one function, or, just have a CDO or a CTO or a CMO or whoever it is, right? It's an organizational resource. And as an organizational resource, it should be treated as such, much like cash, saying that, are we using it the most judiciously? Are we using it in the best way? Are we using it in a way which is net beneficial to the organization, to our customers? Does it help us build our long-term business? So yeah, Prasun, absolutely bang on that one.
Cool. So over to you, Alfred. There's a question that has come from the audience which says, while trust is key when it comes to consumer data, how can it be built by organizations? And you started off your 2-minute note with trust as a key focus, but how does organizations build that? Seems like an interesting question.
Absolutely. I think that, every single panelist here is well grounded in terms of what they want to get from their data, right? I really enjoyed, for example, the journey that Rohit took us through. We happen to have among our customers a company by the name of Franklin Covey. I don't know if you've heard of them, but Franklin Covey they do a lot of training and experts. They also have many events that they run, right? They have also publishing and so on and so forth. The 7 Habits of Very Effective People, etc., is under their belts. So this is what Blaine Carter, which is the Chief Information and Security Officer of Franklin Covey, had to say to me in several occasions. We're great friends. I've interviewed him many times. We've worked together very closely in many occasions. He said, if they were to even attempt to understand regulation and follow the regulation, they would need a team of lawyers, literally, to be in their staff 24/7, because regulations just change every single day, right? PIPL is the most interesting one that has come out, and of course, India will have its own very, very soon. It's already in draft levels, etc. The interesting thing about it is that you don't have to have a team of lawyers if you do what's right for the consumer. And this was what I believe Rohit was also alluding to earlier in his conversation. If you're making it very clear that you are doing a exchange of value for the information that they are rewarding you with, then trust is built as a result. And, we come back to that conversation that Parth was also talking about distilling that resource to several levels, making sure that it's well safeguarded. making sure that, and this was also alluded by Prasun as well, and he talked about the fact that it's not at onboarding or throughout the life cycle or at the plausible deletion stage, it's across the board. That pretty much puts the companies in a position where they have to think about a platform, not about point solutions. Because the last thing that you need is one more siloed system to again increase just one more instance of where that data is being stored. And that's what we have actually tried to do, right? We've incorporated all of the comments that have been previously underlined. From again, going back to Rohit, is that value exchange, is the fact that you do what's best for the customer. And we talk about granularity at a very, very incredible level, because we do have the consent vault as part of our solution as well. But think about this. We have the capability to store the data, because you're in India, right? But who tells you that there won't be, and knocking on wood right here, COVID will hopefully open the boundaries very, very soon, but you'll be catering to a person that comes from China. And the minute that he's a Chinese citizen, he abides by the PIPL, which very specifically says his data has to be stored within the geographical region of China. And it only takes one customer. You said it yourself, right, Vivek? It only takes one customer from GDPR for some of these companies to appear or disappear, because the penalties are huge. And if you really ask me, you made a very, very interesting comment. I think it was Parth, you were talking about the fact that regulators should stop playing chase and just try to work with the industries. I believe that's very close to my heart from an opinion perspective, because it's exactly that. Regulators, what they can do is give it the seriousness that it deserves, and that is done with the fines. And believe me, it's a international topic now. It's a GDP topic now, right? Because GDPR, for example, takes away 5% out of the top line, not the bottom line, of your entire revenue worldwide, just because there's one failure in the way that you're handling. And when they talk about failure, they're not talking about one record. They're just talking about more your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. Do you have a fallback plan? Can you go and understand how you're actually capturing data in one market? Or if we talk about India, in the South region versus the Northern versus the South, you were talking about, India in itself is even more complex than the States, if you really talk to me about it. And I'm not Indian, by the way, but I've had the pleasure of actually being in India for a very short stint in 15 years ago. As a matter of fact, I was learning programming at Wipro.
Yeah, just a little bit of interruption. I've been getting hints from the organizers that we've restarted.
We've jumped out of time. But that's how we do trust. We do trust, again, 3 principles: transparency. You bring the human concept. Imagine if you can click anywhere and you get told what that data is being precisely used for. When you say, give me your date of birth, you're asking because you want to make sure that you're not a minor. Because if you're a minor, you get regulated otherwise. And the value exchange. That's how we build that trust. So thank you very much. I hope I answered the question. I do apologize for
awesome. And so very interesting note. I've written a book on happiness, which is publishing next month. Happiness is a muscle. And one of the chapters is trust. And that book that chapter is inspired by Stephen Covey Jr., who wrote a book called Speed of Trust. So dovetailing all these things about trust and happiness into one. But thanks a lot, my friends, Prasun, Parth, Rohit, Alfred. Wonderful discussion. And I hope the audience learns some things interesting from it to deploy sort of data policies and sort of, I would say, things that take care of the consumer's interest more effectively and also benefit the organization as well as the consumer. So thanks a lot, my friends. A pleasure to be a part of this panel.